There is a kind of danger that doesn't come with a knife, a bomb, or even a lie. It walks quietly, speaks with conviction, and looks on the surface completely harmless. It smiles at you across dinner tables. It votes. It reposts. It works beside you. And in its most dangerous form, it doesn't even know it's dangerous. This is the disturbing insight that haunted the German theologian and philosopher Dietrich Bonhoeffer as he sat imprisoned by the Nazis during the Second World War. He had seen evil up close. He had watched a civilized nation unravel into horror. But what terrified him most, more than malice, more than cruelty, was something else entirely: stupidity. Not the lack of intelligence, not ignorance, but a deeper, more insidious force, one that makes a person incapable of moral clarity, immune to reason, and complicit in horrors without ever realizing they are doing anything wrong. This is what Bonhoeffer called a dangerous threat to the soul and society. And today, his theory may be more urgent than ever, because we live in a world flooded with information yet starved of wisdom, where shouting replaces thinking, where beliefs are borrowed, identities are outsourced, and conscience is dulled by distraction, where stupidity is no longer a punchline, but a political weapon, a social contagion, a spiritual crisis. This video is not a rant, and it's not about calling others stupid. It's a mirror, turned gently but unflinchingly toward ourselves. Because Bonhoeffer's terrifying theory wasn't just a diagnosis of his time, it was a warning, and maybe even a prophecy. In the next hour, we'll explore 6 powerful insights drawn from philosophy, psychology, and lived experience to help us understand what stupidity really is, how it grows, and how we might resist it, not just intellectually, but existentially. We'll walk with Bonhoeffer, but also with Socrates, Hannah Arendt, Jung, Nietzsche, and others who have wrestled with the roots of collective delusion. This is instead about them, and Seps about us, and the quiet battle for clarity, conscience, and courage in a world that would rather we stop thinking altogether. In 1943, behind the cold steel bars of Tegel Prison, a man with a quiet voice and unwavering soul scribbled a thought that would outlive the Third Reich. Stupidity is a more dangerous enemy of the good than malice. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was not a philosopher by profession. He was a theologian, a pastor, and eventually a resistance fighter. But in that prison cell, with bombs falling outside and silence pressing in, he became something else: a witness, not just to brutality, but to the eerie transformation of ordinary people into something unrecognizable. What terrified him wasn't merely the presence of evil, but how thoughtless, obedient, and self assured it had become. People didn't need to be evil to do evil, they only needed to stop thinking. Bonhoeffer noticed something paradoxical. The more stupid a person became, the more confident they seemed, the more slogans they repeated, the less capable they were of reason, dialogue, or even awareness of contradiction. And yet, these were not unintelligent people. So what happened? He concluded something disturbing. Stupidity is not an intellectual defect, but a human one. It happens when a person ceases to be an individual, when they stop being grounded in their own moral center and become absorbed into a group, an ideology, a crowd. When you no longer wrestle with truth yourself, someone else will do your thinking for you. And once that happens, intellect, education, and even good intentions can't save you. In psychological terms, this can be seen as a collapse of internal dialogue. When we are truly thinking, we are in a relationship with ourselves. We question, challenge, reflect, revise. But when we surrender that inner voice to the noise of the world, to the slogans, the peer pressure, the tribal loyalty, we become possessed, not by demons, but by borrowed certainty. Philosopher Erich Fromm described this surrender as automaton conformity, the quiet death of individuality beneath the pressure to belong. It's easier, it's more comfortable, and it's everywhere. Bonhoeffer insists insight pierces deeper, though. He says that attempting to reason with a stupid person is pointless, not because they lack reason, but because they've chosen not to use it. They aren't listening. They can't. They are no longer a who, but a what, a channel through which propaganda flows. And this is what makes stupidity so terrifying. It is not passive ignorance, it is active unawareness. It resists reason, it despises nuance, it answers every complexity with a slogan, every discomfort with denial. But here sips where the mirror turns. We like to believe this danger lives out there, in the misinformed, the extreme, the other. But Bonhoeffer didn't write this theory as a judgment. He wrote it as a confession, a realization that even good people, even educated, ethical citizens, can fall into this state, especially when the world becomes chaotic, especially when the cost of independent thinking becomes high. And so the real question becomes, have I surrendered my moral responsibility to a group? Do I seek comfort in repetition rather than clarity through reflection? Do I still dare to be an individual? This is not a comfortable reflection. It isn't meant to be. Because as Bonhoeffer knew, and as history has shown, it is the comfortable mind that becomes dangerous. We'll go deeper in the next section with Hannah Arendt's chilling insight into how evil becomes banal, not through hatred, but through the sheer absence of thinking. But for now, pause and ask, where in your life are you simply repeating? Where have you traded awareness for alignment? The battle for the world might just begin inside the silence of your own conscience. In 1961, a quiet, bookish man named Adolf Eichmann stood trial in Jerusalem for crimes so vast they seemed impossible to contain in one body. He had been a key architect of the Holocaust, overseeing the logistics of deporting millions to their deaths. But what stunned observers most wasn't his cruelty, it was his normalcy. He didn't stet rant, he didn't stet foam with hatred. He quoted rules, he followed orders. He said repeatedly that he was simply doing his job. The philosopher Hannah Arendt, who covered the trial, coined a haunting phrase to describe what she saw: the banality of evil. Evil not as monstrous or malevolent, but as thoughtless. A man who didn't hate Jews, yet helped murder them. A man who didn't think he had a choice, because he had outsourced his conscience to the system. This is the next step in Bonhoeffer-Sepp's theory, and perhaps its most disturbing implication, that once you surrender your thinking, the group will do it for you. But the group always thinks less. Groups are powerful. They give us identity, safety, and meaning. But they also have a shadow, one that ancient philosophers, modern psychologists, and totalitarian regimes have all understood. The larger the crowd, the smaller the individual. Socrates warned that the unexamined life is not worth living. But in a group, the examined life becomes dangerous. because to question the group is to threaten your belonging. This is why groups tend to punish doubt, shame dissent, and reward obedience, not to truth, but to unity. Psychologist Irving Janis called this groupthink, a process where the desire for harmony overrides critical thinking. Nietzsche, more bluntly, called it herd morality, the suffocation of greatness under the weight of conformity. And Bonhoeffer lived it. He watched the German church, once a place of deep moral reflection, fall almost overnight into allegiance with Hitler, not because its members were evil, but because they wanted to belong. Let's bring it closer to home. Today, group identity is everywhere. Political tribes, religious factions, online mobs, us versus them, narratives. We are constantly invited to choose a side, and once we do, to stop thinking independently. Belonging becomes conditional on agreement, and disagreement becomes betrayal. That's why stupidity, in Bonhoeffer's sense, is so contagious. Because once we're inside the group, we don't have to ask hard questions. We just have to repeat the answers. So, how do we resist? By reclaiming something rare, our moral solitude, the ability to think alone, to reflect, not in echo chambers, but in silence, to ask, is what I believe true, or is it just popular? Bonhoeffer believed that this inner independence, this refusal to let the group think for you, was the only true resistance. Because once the group captures your thinking, it also captures your ethics. If you've made it this far, this journey probably resonates with you. We explore these kinds of deep, often uncomfortable questions every week, the ones that help us see more clearly and live more courageously. So if that calls to something in you, consider subscribing. This isn't a channel for noise, it's for thinking people who still care about conscience. In the next section, we'll look at how certainty becomes seductive and why our craving for it makes us vulnerable to stupidity in its most dogmatic forms. But for now, I invite you to pause and ask yourself, where in my life am I blending in at the cost of truth? The group may offer comfort, but clarity never comes from a crowd. There's Tess, a particular kind of person who is most dangerous in times of confusion, the one who is absolutely sure, while the wise hesitate, the stupid assert, while the reflective pause to think, the foolish offer instant certainty, not despite complexity, but because of it. We live in a world that is increasingly ambiguous, unstable, and overwhelming. And in such a world, certainty becomes a drug. Not the certainty that comes from deep understanding, but the kind that comes from shallow conviction. This is the third layer of Bonhoeffer Sitt's theory of stupidity, that it thrives wherever human beings are desperate to feel right, even when they are deeply wrong. Friedrich Nietzsche understood this temptation well. He wrote that convictions are more dangerous enemies of truth than lies, because lies can be exposed, but a conviction, an emotional attachment to an idea, cannot be reasoned with. It defends itself, not with logic, but with identity. We don't know, just believe something. We are it. Psychologically, this is what cognitive scientists call motivated reasoning. We don't use reason to discover truth. We use it to defend what we already want to believe. And nothing soothes the ego like a clean, absolute explanation, especially when the world feels chaotic. This is why conspiracy theories, ideologies, and moral panics spread so quickly. They offer certainty in the face of fear. They give you a villain, a script, a purpose, and most dangerously, They give you the feeling of intelligence without the discipline of thought. Stupidity, in this form, is often loud. It uses declarative language, aggressive confidence, and simplified worldviews. It avoids nuance like a virus because nuance threatens its fragile armor. Think of social media, where every opinion must be instantly declared, every take must be hot, and every doubt must be silenced or mocked. Certainty is instead just rewarded, is that's required. But Bonhoeffer and those like him knew something deeper. Only the one who thinks in solitude, who listens more than they speak, who holds their conclusions lightly, can actually grow in wisdom. Why? Because truth, unlike certainty, doesn't come on demand. It arrives slowly, like dawn, and it asks us to remain in the dark a little longer than we'd like. Nia steps where it gets uncomfortable. Each of us is vulnerable to this, not just the people we disagree with. We all crave certainty when we set are afraid. We all want the quick answer when we still we're lost. And we all have egos that would rather feel smart than be humbled by truth. But real intelligence and moral clarity begin when we can say three hard words: I don't stet know. From there, the door opens, not to emptiness, but to depth, not to confusion, but to curiosity. So ask yourself, where am I clinging to certainty because I'm afraid of not knowing? Which of my beliefs are emotional shelters rather than tested truths? Can I loosen my grip, not to fall, but to finally see? Because in a time of mass certainty, the doubter is not the weak one. They might just be the last person who can still think. There's a terrifying moment in George Orwell's 1984 when language itself begins to shrink. The regime invents newspeak, a simplified form of English designed not to express truth, but to eliminate the very possibility of rebellious thought. Words are narrowed, meanings are erased, and with them the capacity to think deeply or dissent at all disappears. Orwell wasn't set just writing fiction. He was exposing something real, the way stupidity, when embedded in language, becomes propaganda. This is the next layer of Bonhoeffer-Sess theory, and one we are now deeply entangled in. When people stop thinking, words lose their meaning, and what's left is noise dressed up as truth. Michel Foucault, the French philosopher, argued that power doesn't just operate through force, but through discourse. Who controls the language controls what can be said, and who controls what can be said eventually controls what can be thought. It sets a chilling idea because it means that stupidity isn't just an individual weakness, it can be engineered. Think of the slogans we hear every day: trust the science, make it great again, love is love, silence is violence. Each one might hold a grain of truth, but used carelessly, they become mantras that replace thinking, not encourage it. They simplify the world into binaries. They close conversation instead of opening it. They become shields that prevent us from asking, but what do you mean by that? When language is infected by stupidity, we begin to speak without awareness. We repeat things because they're popular, because they sound moral, because our group says them. But in doing so, we lose the most sacred aspect of speech: its power to reveal reality, not obscure it. Bonhoeffer believed that truth must be spoken clearly, even when it's dangerous. He wrote, "The word is not only an instrument of communication, it is also an instrument of struggle. To speak truthfully is to fight, not with violence, but with clarity, not against others, but against the fog that stupidity casts over everything. Here, Hespe's the uncomfortable part. We all participate in this fog when we use language lazily, when we say what sounds right instead of what is right, when we avoid precision because we fear backlash, when we speak in slogans instead of stories, in labels instead of truths. We don't have to be propagandists to spread propaganda. We just have to stop thinking about our words. So, what does resistance look like? It begins in your own mouth. Start by noticing the phrases you repeat without question. Ask yourself, where did I hear that? Do I know what it actually means? Have I ever challenged it? Because your language is a reflection of your inner life. If your speech becomes clearer, more careful, more courageous, it's a sign that your thinking is alive. And when your thinking is alive, stupidity cannot control you. In the next section, we'll go deeper into what fuels mass stupidity from within through the lens of Carl Jung's shadow, the hidden parts of ourselves we project onto others. But for now, ask yourself, what words am I using as armor instead of tools? What truth might I be avoiding by hiding behind the right sounding phrase? Because when we stop thinking about what we say, we stop thinking altogether. There is a strange moment in human history, repeated across cultures and centuries, when a crowd becomes convinced that a particular group is to blame for everything, not just for specific problems, but for the very wrongness of the world. They look different, they think differently, they act as a mirror, and that mirror becomes unbearable. And so the crowd turns, not with curiosity, but with hatred. But why? Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist, offers us a lens for this madness. He called it the shadow, the unconscious part of ourselves that holds all the things we deny, repress, or disown. The shadow is not evil by nature. It's simply the part of you that you do not want to see. Your cowardice, your envy, your cruelty, your shame, the parts of you that contradict your self image, the parts of you that, if you were honest, would undo the story you tell yourself about who you are. And what do we do with this unwanted cargo? We project it, we see it in others, and attack it there. This is where collective stupidity becomes not just passive, but violent. Because when the shadow is unexamined and the group offers an enemy, a scapegoat, or a stereotype, we feel a surge of righteousness. We are no longer confused. We are convinced. We are no longer ashamed. We are justified. This is how Bonhoeffer's terrifying insight deepens. That stupidity is not just about a failure to think, it's about a refusal to face oneself. The Nazi regime didn't rise because people suddenly became monsters. It rose because millions of people, already burdened with economic fear, national shame, and personal confusion, were offered a shortcut. Don't instead look inward, blame outward. And once that happens, the stupid person becomes not only resistant to truth, but violently loyal to a lie, because the lie is protecting something fragile, their sense of self. Jung warned that confronting the shadow is not comfortable work. It requires solitude, honesty, courage. You have to look at the things you despise and admit that they live in some small way inside you. But if you don't do this, someone else will do it for you. They'll offer you an enemy, a slogan, a reason to never look inward again. This is what mass movements, cults, and mobs often provide. They give you moral clarity by outsourcing your self hatred onto others. And that is the deepest danger of stupidity. It creates an illusion of righteousness. while hiding a fractured unconscious self beneath it. So, what sets the path forward? It begins in the mirror. Ask yourself, what am I unwilling to admit about myself? What do I attack in others that I secretly fear lives in me? Am I resisting stupidity out there while being blind to the fear and denial within? Jung believed that the only way to become whole and to avoid becoming a danger to yourself and others was to integrate the shadow, not to act on it, not to justify it, but to face it, name it, and carry it with awareness. Because when you are honest about your darkness, you are no longer compelled to destroy it in someone else. In a world saturated by noise, the hardest thing to do is be still, not distracted, not entertained, not outraged, just still. Yet Dietrich Bonhoeffer believed that this, more than protest, more than argument, more than brilliance, was where resistance truly began, not in the streets, but in the soul. In a letter from prison, he wrote, "It is not the act of thinking, but of inner silence that is the beginning of all understanding." He had watched the collapse of German society. He had seen the churches turn into instruments of propaganda. He had heard once good people speak monstrous things, not out of hatred, but out of emptiness. And he came to believe that the only real antidote to stupidity, as he defined it, was solitude. But what is solitude, really? It steps not just being alone, it's the act of facing yourself without distraction. It sets the quiet courage to ask, what do I believe? Truly, when no one else is watching. Socrates called this care of the soul. He refused to run with the crowd. He asked dangerous questions. He sat in silence more than he spoke. And when he was condemned to death, he drank the poison calmly, because he had long ago chosen his conscience over his comfort. Bonhoeffer did the same. And in their example, we see something quietly revolutionary, that the person who dares to stand alone in truth becomes ungovernable by lies. Stupidity, in all its forms, is contagious. It thrives on distraction, on noise, on tribalism, but it dies quickly and painfully in the presence of a person who has done their inner work, because that person cannot be swayed by flattery. They cannot be manipulated by fear. They cannot be seduced by slogans. They have stared into their own darkness. They have claimed their moral responsibility. They have chosen awareness, even when it hurts, and that makes them dangerous in the best possible way. In psychological terms, solitude is where integration happens, where the conscious and unconscious begin to speak to one another, where you become less reactive, less susceptible, more rooted. Solitude is not escape, it's just preparation for clarity, for responsibility, for presence. So, what does this mean for you? It means stepping away, even briefly, from the crowd. It means turning off the algorithm. It means noticing how much of your identity has been assembled from borrowed pieces and asking which of them actually belong to you. Because without solitude, your thoughts are not your own. Your beliefs are not chosen, they are absorbed. And your conscience is a puppet, not a compass. Bonhoeffer's life ended in a Nazi prison at the age of 39. He had written sermons, smuggled messages, resisted tyranny. But perhaps the most powerful thing he ever did was think, and in thinking, refuse to become stupid, even when the entire world rewarded stupidity with power. In our conclusion, we'll return to the heart of his warning and what it means now for people like you and me, because the world doesn't need more opinions. and needs more people who are willing to wake up. Stupidity is not fate, but resisting it is a choice. So here we are, at the end of a journey that, if we have taken it seriously, has not only exposed the terrifying reality of stupidity, but also revealed something even more urgent, that it lives within us. Stupidity, as Bonhoeffer warned, is not merely an absence of intelligence, it is a surrender of moral responsibility. It is when the individual abdicates their capacity to think, to question, to reflect, to stand alone, and allows the group, the system, or the slogan to take over. It thrives in noise. It feeds on fear. It disguises itself as certainty, loyalty, righteousness, but underneath, it is always the same, the refusal to see. And yet, there is hope. Because Bonhoeffer did not write from a place of cynicism, he wrote from a place of profound moral clarity. He believed that even in the darkest times, there are those who refuse to become hollow, who do not yield their minds to propaganda, who do not numb their conscience in comfort, who do not join the mob, even when the mob is winning. They are the thinkers, the question askers, the people who, in solitude, become sovereign. Let's recall the 6 insights we explored. Stupidity is not a lack of intellect, it's a surrender of the self. When you stop thinking for yourself, you become a vessel for unthinking harm. The group thinks for you, and it always thinks less. Belonging at the cost of conscience is the first step into darkness. Ego craves certainty, and stupidity loves the sound of certainty. Beware the comfort of being right too quickly. Truth is earned, not inherited. Language becomes propaganda when thought is absent. Every word you repeat unthinkingly becomes a tool for clarity or control. The unconscious shadow fuels collective stupidity. What you refuse to see in yourself, you will seek to destroy in others. True resistance begins in solitude. The quiet mind, the reflective spirit, the independent thinker. This is the antidote. What do we do now? We begin again with ourselves. Every day, the world will try to lull you back into sleep. It will offer you shortcuts to belonging, to identity, to opinion. It will tell you that comfort matters more than clarity, that it accepts better to fit in than to wake up. But Bonhoeffer's life and his death remind us that history is not changed by the crowd. It is changed by the conscience of one awakened soul. Maybe that soul is you. So I leave you with this question, not as a challenge, but as a quiet call. In a world that rewards noise, will you protect your silence? In a culture of certainty, will you dare to dwell in doubt? In an age of passive absorption, will you fight to think, not just for your own sake, but because the world quietly needs those who still can? Those who, like Bonhoeffer, are willing to lose everything except their integrity. If this journey spoke to you, I invite you to stay with us. Subscribe, share your thoughts in the comments, and bring your questions, not because we have the final answers, but because we need each other to keep thinking. This is not the end of a video. It steps the beginning of a conversation, and perhaps the quiet start of a revolution, the kind that begins not in streets, but in minds. Yours.